I stand in support of this motion that, in the opinion of the House, government should ban all pay-to-pay practices by banks operating in Canada through the enactment of a mandatory financial code of conduct to protect consumers. Mr. Speaker, I keep my finger on the pulse of my riding of St. John South Mount Pearl in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm constantly out and about in the community, on the doorsteps, in the coffee shops, on the streets, on the wharfs, even in the boats, Mr. Speaker. I ask my constituents for constant feedback about issues ranging from childcare and climate change to pensions to poverty. And of course, Mr. Speaker, all federal issues having to do with the great province of Newfoundland and Labrador. If it moves here in Ottawa and it affects my province, Mr. Speaker, I'm all over it. I'm on my feet in this House. Mr. Speaker, some of the most feedback I received to date as a Member of Parliament has to do with banks. More specifically, Mr. Speaker, bank fees, which people see as generally too high, and credit card interest rates, which people also see as too high, through the roof, actually, Mr. Speaker. Household debt in Canada is alarming, Mr. Speaker. The total debt owed by all Canadians at the end of March was a record $1.8 trillion. We've gone on a bit of a borrowing binge, Mr. Speaker. That's how it's been described, living on credit, a borrowing binge. But, Mr. Speaker, I would say the banks have gone on a bit of a binge themselves. Household debt in Canada is at a record high, but bank profits are right up there too, Mr. Speaker. The top 5 banks in this country are making a killing. Profit is a good word, Mr. Speaker. Profit is to be celebrated. Profit means growth. Profit means success. But is there a point when profit crosses the line into unfettered greed? Now, in the first 2 quarters of their fiscal years, Mr. Speaker, Canada's top 5 banks amassed more than $16 billion in profits. RBC alone had broken records by pulling in almost $5 billion in only the first half of the year. I'd say banking binge is pretty accurate, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you what drives me, Mr. Speaker, my pet banking peeve, going to an ATM that's not with my bank, but still one of Canada's big 5, and being charged $3 to withdraw cash over and above my own bank fees. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's obscene. I'll go without before I pay that $3. It's the principle, Mr. Speaker, and it happens right outside this House down on Spark Street. I consider it gouging, and I take that personal. I also take my business elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. Now, one of our new Democratic Party proposals, Mr. Speaker, is to cap bank fees at federally regulated ATM machines, those machines owned by chartered banks, at 50 cents. Now, banks would still walk away with a healthy profit at 50 cents a transaction, Mr. Speaker, but that's another topic. Today's motion is about pay to pay, paying to pay your bill. Now, do you find that offensive, Mr. Speaker? Because I do. Canadians, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians shouldn't have to fork over their hard-earned dollars to receive a bank statement or to pay a bill. When was the last time you went into a restaurant, Mr. Speaker, and had to pay extra for the check, for the honor of being handed the check or paying the check? Because that's what pay-to-pay fees amount to, Mr. Speaker, paying a fee to pay your bill. Now, Canadians will pay up to $180 million this year alone just to receive bank statements, Mr. Speaker. No one should be charged, Mr. Speaker, for receiving bank statements or paying their bills. Now, these fees that charge extra for the bill itself unfairly target seniors, about 40% of whom don't use the Internet, Mr. Speaker. These fees unfairly target those without Internet access, which amounts to 1 in 5 homes in Canada, Mr. Speaker, according to Stats Can. These fees unfairly target families already struggling to pay their bills, Mr. Speaker. 46% of households with income below $30,000 a year don't have Internet. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the 2013 speech from the throne, the Conservatives promised to end pay-to-pay policies so customers weren't charged extra to receive paper bills. Now, Conservative Budget 2014 last year promised again, promised it again, Mr. Speaker. Then, when it came to taking action, Mr. Speaker, the conservative budget excluded banks from the pay-to-pay fees. They excluded them when they had the chance. $180 million in 2013, another $180 million in 2014. That's a total, Mr. Speaker, of $360 million that Canadians had to pay because this Conservative government failed to act, Mr. Speaker. Now, last year, the Conservative government blocked telecommunications and cable companies from charging fees for paper bills, Mr. Speaker. Why weren't the banks included? I don't have an answer to that question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, do you have an answer to that question? I've asked around. I can't get an answer. Dead silence from that side of the House, Mr. Speaker. Now, I was in this House today during question period, Mr. Speaker, when the Minister of Finance rose to his feet to say the government will be supporting this motion. Now, does he expect a pat on the back for that, Mr. Speaker? He supports this motion, Mr. Speaker, but when he had an opportunity to change the law of the land, to stop banks from charging pay-to-pay fees, his government failed to act. It stopped short. Now, sitting in this House today, Mr. Speaker, watching the government in question period, for example, it is obvious that this government is on its last legs. The minister supports stopping banks from charging pay-to-pay fees, but he didn't outlaw those fees last year when telecommunication companies and cable companies were blocked from charging fees for paper bills. Again, Mr. Speaker, the question is, why not? The Conservatives are all over the place, Mr. Speaker. It reminds me, Mr. Speaker, of the Finance Minister's unexpected announcement last week that he's prepared to hear proposals to expand or enhance the Canada Pension Plan. Now, the Conservatives had written off that idea, but now, in an election year, with no mention of it in the recent federal budget, they're possibly open to it. I just shake my head, Mr. Speaker. They're all over the place. But that's also a good thing, Mr. Speaker, because it won't be long now, Mr. Speaker. It won't be long now, and we'll have a change of government. It won't be long now. Now, a final word on banks, Mr. Speaker. I'm old enough to remember a day, Mr. Speaker, that when you called a branch, you actually got someone from the branch. You got them on the phone. Now, that's getting harder and harder to do, Mr. Speaker. Banks are almost cold in terms of personal touch, and they're very calculated. It seems now, Mr. Speaker, to be all about the numbers. I can't remember, Mr. Speaker, the last time I heard of a bank giving someone a break by writing off interest or forgiving a loan. But then, yes, I can, Mr. Speaker. An interesting news story broke back home in Newfoundland and Labrador over the last week, and it was over how three major banks, Scotiabank, CIBC, and the Royal Bank, all those three banks, they wrote off $371,000 in interest charges to the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador relating to a loan for the 2003 election campaign. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a rare occurrence for an individual Newfoundlander or Labradorian, an individual Canadian, to get a break from the banks. We're being charged for our paper bills. Bank fees are too high, Mr. Speaker. Credit card interest rates, they are shocking, Mr. Speaker. And bank profit is measured in billions. Meantime, the only one getting a break that I know of is the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador. Not nearly good enough, Mr. Speaker. But I'll end on this, Mr. Speaker. It won't be long now. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Leduc.
I want to thank my colleague for his statement. As he knows, the government is supportive of the motion presented by the NDP, but I think we do need to bring some sense of reality. Canadians should be proud of the fact that for 7 years in a row, the World Economic Forum has recognized Canada as having the best banking system in the world. You can get your basic major banking services for $4 or less a month. We have a 21-day grace period for credit card payments in this country, something that was brought in force by this government. I do want to say about, people saying bank profits, banks succeeding. We can't see this as banks over here succeeding. I can recall my father, who's a retired school teacher, complaining about this one time. I said, Dad, let's go look at the Alberta Teachers Retirement investments on the website. It was bank after bank after bank after bank. And I said, Dad, your well-being, your defined benefit pension plan is in part directly linked to banks doing well in this country. We are very much linked in this society, in the Canadian society. If you look at the Canada Pension Plan investments, something that the opposition wants to increase, they have loads of investments in our major banks. So I'd just like the member to stand up perhaps and add a little bit of balance to what he's saying in terms of being so critical of the banking sector in this country.
Honourable member for St. John South Mount Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. I'm not so much critical of the banks, although I have been for sure. I'm more critical of this Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. Now, they had an opportunity. They said they would act on the opportunity in 2013 to ban pay-to-pay, and they did not do it. They had the same opportunity. They said they'd do it in 2014 to ban pay-to-pay, and the Conservative government did not do it. So if every year that costs Canadians $180 million in pay-to-pay fees, times 2 is $360 million. So that's how much Canadians, people arrived from Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, have had to pay because this Conservative government, which is so supportive of this motion, failed to act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say I'm a bit disappointed in the member's comments when he tries to tie the relationship with the Liberal Party and the banks. And I say shame to the member, Mr. Speaker, because quite frankly, the banks as an industry has loaned hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for the New Democratic Party also, Mr. Speaker. And I challenge the member to stand in his place to indicate that in those situations was the bank never gave any sort of break to the New Democratic Party, Mr. Speaker. My question to the member is, would he not at the very least recognize that Canada has a healthy banking industry, second to no other industry in the world in terms of banking industries, and in good part it's because of the actions taken by Jean Chrétien during the 90s that ultimately prevented Canada from going as far as other countries around the world, G7 countries, in terms of their economics and the impact on their economy because of bank closures and foreclosures that had taken place. So I think that his priorities might be somewhat misplaced.
Honourable member for St. John South Mount Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. To his first point about the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador that had $371,000 in interest charges written off recently from the banks, from 3 major banks. I don't know why that was, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador has yet to come out and really explain that, Mr. Speaker. It's a little too close to comfort. In terms of the banks, yes, we do have a healthy banking system in Canada, Mr. Speaker. That's beyond the shadow of a doubt. But credit card interest rates are too high, and they're hurting they're hurting Newfoundland and Labrador families, and our bank fees are too high, Mr. Speaker. When you have profits in the billions, one bank alone making $5 billion in the first half of this year, Mr. Speaker, that will tell you that a balance has been lost, Mr. Speaker, a balance between people and profit. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate.